Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Weeks. I am a full-time admissions consultant, and I help people get into top business schools. And today I'm joined by Tom Lawrence. Now, Tom was an MBA recruiter at Amazon back in the day, and then he worked at Oxford Said Business School's careers team, helping people pivot into tech jobs at companies like Amazon. And now Tom is a career coach that works with students and schools to help people make that transition into tech. So really, there is absolutely nobody better almost on the earth to tell us about career transitions into the tech industry. Tom, it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. I don't know about the best person on this earth. Like, there's hundreds of people out there, and this is something actually I'll talk about a lot, which is the people who work in the industry are best placed to help people pivot into that sector. But people like me who have kind of been there and done it, and also helped students go on that journey, are really well placed to help other people go on that journey as well. Yeah. But thank you.
And the experience of helping, being at Said Business School, etc., having helped literally hundreds of people make that transition, that brings something to the table as well. So a little bit of British modesty there, I don't mind. So let's start off, please, with tech. So I would say something like a third of the people that I meet who are looking to apply to business school are doing so because they want to transition into the tech industry. So why is tech such an attractive post-MBA career?
There's a lot of reasons, right? In a lot of places, the money can be good. But actually, I think I've seen a lot of people going into tech because they get to work on something tangible and in many cases meaningful to them, depending on what part of tech someone goes into. Because obviously things like consulting, where yes, there's great money there. There's a pretty tough work-life balance that comes with that. Tech, you've got the image of ping pong tables and sandals, which is true in many cases, but not everywhere. But there is definitely a bit more flexibility in that space. I mean, I don't like to generalize, but typically, there are more flexible workers in the tech space than many other sectors. But then, of course, in the tech sector, you get to work with data, is pretty much a guarantee. And an MBA will set you up really well to work with data. Some of the hard skills that you pick up as part of an MBA aligns really well with the tech sector, the leadership skills as well. So there's a lot of great opportunity in the tech sector where people can have a meaningful impact and apply the skills that they've just picked up.
So as somebody who's had exposure to several different areas within the tech sector, both from your own work, but also from anecdotal conversations with students, can you help me differentiate between the cultures at the different tech firms? Amazon, for example, is known for being quite hard-nosed. Other places, maybe flip-flops are more okay. Can you tell me about that, about those differences in culture?
Well, I mean, the headline is that there are differences, and it depends, and it's going to vary from organization to organization. So I think this is the beauty of the tech sector, in that there is so much diversity of work, diversity of talent, and actually that makes for a really exciting space. So yes, I've seen firsthand Amazon can be an intense place, but actually my experience of being there, I stayed with them for 11 years and worked in a number of different areas because it was a great place to work. I would have left if that wasn't the case. And yes, it's intense in terms of there's high growth, high expectation, and everyone's super smart, and you've got to keep up. But actually, there's a lot of empathy there. There's a lot of development opportunities, a lot of exciting things to work on. So the Amazon that I experienced wasn't perhaps as difficult as has been reported in the press in the past. And then you go to a smaller startup where it completely depends, I think, on who the founder is and what the culture is. You can get a super relaxed startup where they'll come in at 10 and lounge around playing on games consoles for a couple of hours. But you'll also get an equivalent where it's super intense, kind of long hours, depends what stage they're at. So actually the key, I think, comes back to really good networking and really good research someone who wants to get into the tech sector, because it's going to vary so much. There's no guarantees. It's really important to kind of plot your path according to what's really important to you. And I think that MBA really helps you do that because of all the support that you get, all of the development that you get. That sets you up really well to be clear about what's important to you and how you can go about working towards that.
Interesting. So the tech sector at the moment, and you mentioned some startups, the tech sector at the moment is going through a period of change. We are hearing about redundancies in the United States, especially. Can you talk to me about what tech recruiting is like at the moment and what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, mixed. But you're right in that certainly in the US, of course, everyone's seeing the redundancies, and my heart goes out to those folks who are affected. But on a global scale, I think in big tech in particular, hiring has slowed. So it's not just the US. There's redundancies in Europe as well, but there's also just a slow in recruitment, and in particular with structured hiring, which I'm sure is something we'll talk a bit about further down the line. But big tech is slower. There's no doubt. It was booming. 5 years ago, growing at a crazy pace. I was lucky enough to be part of that, and that was really exciting. MBAs were seen, in particular, as a really kind of important talent to tap into. But of course, big tech, as it's evolved, has had to streamline its workforce. So there's no question there's fewer opportunities there. But I think where one door closes, another one opens. It's a bit of a cheesy line, but actually in tech, there is a lot of opportunity as a bigger sector as it is, right? Because there's so many different ways you could cut tech up or count something as tech. But there's so much opportunity out there where other smaller pockets are really thriving. Fintech is up and down at the moment massively from what I see, from one day to the next. There's loads of opportunities, and then there's not. And then there's smaller sectors within tech, health tech, agri-tech, lots of little things kind of popping up. And there's jobs everywhere. You only have to look on LinkedIn to see that people are hiring. And of course, when it comes to an MBA, you've got a long lead time to work with as well. So actually, I always advise students to not read too much into certainly what's gone on in the past, or indeed what's going on now, because in 6 months' time it'll be different, let alone in a year or 2 years when someone's actually on the MBA and kind of plotting their path at that point.
I love that. So if people are looking at an MBA as a way to transition into the tech industry, how should applicants consider the different business schools? In other words, what are the tech companies looking for in an MBA program, and how do they decide where to recruit from?
Well, yeah, this is the tricky one where, again, it's going to change over time. But speaking to my experience, when obviously I was running MBA recruitment at Amazon across Europe, and I was taking that kind of roadshow to the top schools, for me, some of the strategy behind that, albeit a number of years ago, was things around being efficient. Ultimately, I mean, again, that's how Amazon like to work. So it's looking at data to inform that strategy. So what are the historical number of hires from a school over recent years, like the absolute number, but what's the conversion rate like as well in terms of offers to accepts? So do MBAs actually end up joining somewhere like Amazon? In the end, it's all well and good getting an offer out there, but if students aren't accepting, then it doesn't make sense for Amazon to keep going somewhere where they're not actually getting people join. There's diversity things, like the percentage of females on the class was a consideration. The size of the class as well. Oxford was an interesting one where when I was recruiting for Amazon, they leapt up the class size, right? It jumped from like 200 to 330 from one year to the next. And me as the recruiter being on the other side of that was like, well, what's that going to do for the recruiting? Have they just let a load of people in, and it means we're not necessarily going to hire more. And actually, not surprisingly, interestingly, the number of hires did go up in line with the class size. So Oxford were clearly good at increasing the class size and keep retaining the quality of candidates. So it's things like that. Like, can you, with all of the commitment that it takes to go and recruit from a school, how confident can you be that you're going to get some hires out of it, right? Because you've got to mobilize senior leaders from across Europe to come and present, but also have you got alumni that you can leverage to them to give their time back? And then you've got to do the interviews. Like somewhere like Amazon was just such a big machine, it would roll in 20 interviewers to do 100 student interviews in a day. That takes a lot of resource to plan, but also of leaders to step away. These are directors stepping away from their day job for 2 days. So it was a big commitment. So efficiency was the kind of overriding rule. I don't know that all organizations, well, I know that they don't do it at that scale, but for those who do come on campus, I'd like to think they're trying to be smart with their time as well. But when I've kind of spoken to other employers about coming to Oxford to hire students when I was there in careers, part of our product that we were putting out there were the students themselves, and the kind of resources that they get whilst they're at Oxford. So we're talking about the diversity of the class as a key point here for Oxford, but also some of the curriculum that gets delivered. Certainly co-curriculum when it comes to careers as well. SQL proficiency being one particular thing. It's really, I think, good for a tech company to know that they can hire from a pool of people where actually they're getting taught SQL whilst they're there. So by the time they're joining the company, that's already a language that they know. So there's things like that. So it's got to be a curriculum that gives relevant skills to the industry in question. Mm-hmm. And I think diversity is really important for a lot of recruiters, where they can be confident that the pool that they're recruiting from isn't just white males essentially. So those are some of the main considerations.
Sure. Okay, interesting. And so if somebody is thinking, right, I want to go and I want to do an MBA, I want to transition into a tech company, maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's a startup. The role that everybody's heard of is this product manager role. It's obviously not the only role in a tech company. Can you talk about the other roles that are available, that are popular with MBAs, and that in your experience, MBAs make a good job of converting into?
Yeah, absolutely. So, product management, yes, there's no question there is supply and demand there, right? No question. And an MBA definitely helps, I think, someone pivoting into product management, as long as they're in the right place, thinking about the right things. So to that, I would say we're going back 4-5 years. When I was at Oxford, we saw that all that time back then, and built out a product management roadmap, as we called it, which specifically was like a pathway, a track that helps students who are interested in that function understand what it looks like, because actually it varies outside of the tech sector, right? So product manager in healthcare is very different to a product manager in fintech. So
could you touch on that maybe a little bit about how they are different?
Yeah, well, I think it's basically, I think obviously how they use data can be different, that the access to data that they have in healthcare, where you're talking paper forms and that kind of stuff, is the stuff that they're having to grapple with, and the product sometimes can be more physical. Whereas obviously in something like fintech, you're talking about software products potentially, and even just, I think the responsibilities of the role can vary. In some places, it's much more about kind of project management, where in other places, a product manager is potentially more strategic and analytical, but it varies from company to company. So that was what we recognized, that variety, and how actually if you can get alumni who are product managers in different sectors to come in and share what product management looks like to them, then that's really useful in helping someone think about that function. So, I mean, product management, we could talk about for hours. It's really interesting, loads of opportunities. My advice is to talk to people who do it in the sectors that you're interested in. Outside of that, there are, loads of other functions. I think in the tech sector, sticking with that, marketing roles, I'm seeing kind of grow more and more over the last few years. MBAs who have maybe been in some kind of creative or marketing related role can actually pivot their career into a marketing role in the tech sector, again, because they're much more data driven. They are much more adept at kind of making data driven decisions. Then that pivot is much more helped by an MBA. But something like sales as well, I think, isn't talked about enough for MBAs. Again, we recognized this a few years ago, and trying to open MBA's eyes to the world of business development. Some people may perceive it as being a bit of a cheesy kind of function to be in, but actually there's so much opportunity in sales or business development in tech. That there can be really good money there with good kind of compensation packages, but also just really interesting opportunities to understand the tech product and then put it out there to customers. So I think functions like that are super interesting and should be considered by MBAs because of the alignment to the skills that they pick up.
So what are some of what is achievable in terms of a pivot into tech? So I often speak to people who say something like, I'm in, let's say, real estate. The interest rates are going up and the real estate market is difficult. I quite like tech. Maybe I have like a side hustle or something, and I want to pivot from real estate into tech. And my knee-jerk reaction is often like, it might be tough. Like, what sort of transferable skills you have, it might be tough. Can you give us an idea of what is a realistic transition in terms of from another industry into tech, and how somebody can go about that transition smoothly?
Yeah, so the headline is, and again, this might sound cheesy, but anything is possible, right? And I have seen this in the tech sector. I have seen firsthand, especially when it came to Amazon. When I was recruiting, they'd hire ex-soldiers, a dentist, a nuclear submarine engineer, right? Anything goes, right? And it depends on the individual and the company and the role that they're going into as to how possible it is, or how difficult it will be. So this comes down then to the inputs. What can an individual do to help their chances to make a pivot like that? And you touched on it yourself. I think what's realistic. Perhaps what are the transferable skills to make that initial step? Because I've worked with a lot of MBAs who want to get into strategy in big tech. That's probably like one of the top 5 most desired roles in the most desired sector for MBAs. Super competitive space, and not everyone can go into it straight away. So be prepared to potentially make a first step, like a stepping stone towards that, and get into an organization that has that role for you further down the line, and go for something that better aligns with some of the skills that you've picked up. But I think broadly speaking, the tech sector is really open-minded about where someone is coming from in terms of their work experience, and it is more about the skills, and it's about that individual's alignment to the company values. This is something Amazon obviously focused on with their leadership principles, but other tech companies do it as well with their own values. These aren't just words on posters on walls. They are genuinely the way a company will assess candidates and see if they're going to be a good fit. I hate the word cultural fit, but does this person align to the values and the way they're working? So that's how someone needs to think of it, right? Can they find, through the good inputs of good networking, good research, having meaningful conversations with people, that's the way to find the companies that align to what you want to do and that you can understand how they work and therefore position yourself really well to make that pivot. It's all of that work that goes into you knowing what good looks like and then being able to position yourself accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what you're saying is, if I wanted to go from, I used real estate as my example before. So if I wanted to go from a marketing role in real estate to a strategy role in tech, which is quite a big leap, what you're saying is maybe consider a marketing role in tech first, which is closer aligned to my pre-MBA experience, and use that marketing in tech role to make the next step, maybe a few years down the line, into strategy in tech, which is ultimately where you want to be.
Exactly that.
Yeah. Right.
But
so there's
a big but here. There are other ways to do it. Well, there's one other way to do it, which we haven't really touched on yet, which is a leadership development program, which Amazon has, which some other organizations have as well. And those are typically about hiring MBAs in to develop them. Obviously, it's in the name, and to fast track them into, some of the more senior and interesting and sexy roles ultimately. So those are worth considering, but they are also super competitive and they are quite narrow in some cases. So
can you tell us about what they involve? So that you rotate around different parts of the business, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll talk to the Amazon one that I hired into, and that it was exactly that. It was called the Launch program, essentially doing two different roles over 3 years, 18 months in each. But that it wasn't completely set in stone, but it was about launching someone's career at Amazon, hence the name. So you would get exposure to different parts of the business, different functions, but you'd also have this great network and this great resource supporting your development. I mean, there wasn't any kind of special treatment or training, but ultimately the program was about the placement of the role that you did. And that gives you the opportunity to drive your career within the organization. So something like that is a great way potentially to go for a really cool role further down the line, and maybe you can get promoted more quickly than you might otherwise do so. But they are hard to get into. Hiring is limited into those, certainly at the moment. Amazon have really slowed their structured hiring. But there's still opportunity to join the organization directly. So the direct hire market, as it's known in kind of career terms, that's where you go into a role that is advertised externally, like everyone else, ultimately. There's so much opportunity there. The structured programs aren't the be all and end all. And I've seen many students go for the structured hiring, not get the role, not get into the program, but a few months later, get into Amazon directly because they can find something that's a much better fit for them.
Interesting. So can you touch on what that recruitment process actually looks like? A lot of people will be watching this probably pre-MBA thinking, I'm going to go into the MBA, and they're possibly expecting a ticket, that the MBA is basically a free ticket into Amazon, Google, Meta, or a startup. And they're thinking, I just need to get into the MBA, then everything will be fine. Can you walk through the recruitment process? You touched on just how competitive the recruitment process is for some of these programs. Can you tell us what that looks like?
Yeah, and I love the way you put that question, because it is not a ticket and you are not going to get placed. And I always used to kind of emphasize that when I would be part of open days at Oxford, right, where the career person gets wheeled out to talk about all the amazing support that prospective students would get. But one of the first things I would always say is, don't see us as your recruiters, please. I don't want you coming here and expecting us to get your job for you. And I think it's really important to manage expectations there. But to kind of go back to your question, what does the recruitment process look like? So again, it depends. That's one of my favorite phrases when I talk to students, because they say, well, what's this going to be like? What's that going to be like? It really does depend. It varies from company to company. Points to the importance of research and networking to get those insights at a company level. But typically, certainly with that, let me talk to Amazon's hiring in particular, right? You've got behavioral interviewing, which is the primary way of assessing a candidate. And sure, there's some other bits and bobs along the way, some online assessments, maybe a case type question along the way. But actually, Amazon and most of the big tech companies, Meta, Google, Microsoft, and so on, they do use behavioral interviewing in one form or another. So that's a super important part of the process for a prospective candidate to get their head around early. And that's where schools are really helpful, because career coaches typically, are very well versed with behavioral interviewing and have support there. You cannot start this soon enough, in my opinion, in terms of understanding what behavioral interviewing is. And the headline on that is, by the way, it's tell me about a time you did X. And that's where then the candidate's talking about something they did, how they did it. And obviously the interviewer is assessing how that aligns to how that company works. Mm-hmm. So because it's so widely used, this is why it's preparation that you can do before you start the MBA, maybe even before you apply, because actually, obviously, you'll get interviewed as part of the application process. And again, the more comfortable you are with talking about stuff that you've done and talking about yourself, that makes you a better candidate anyway. So behavioral interviewing is probably the single most important thing. And then when you get into individual companies, Google, renowned for sometimes dropping in these kind of random brain teaser questions, or certainly when it comes to product management interviewing, you're going to have a technical component, technical assessment. And it's super important to get proper practice in ahead of that and proper support. And there's plenty of resources out there. If it's not through the school, you do the research online. But if you're going for a product manager role, you should be preparing for a kind of technical competency. Sometimes it can be coding, sometimes it can be working with data. Again, it's going to vary by company. But that's the overall process in a nutshell. Normally they're quite quick is the other thing for tech. That's the beauty of tech hiring. Often it's such a fast-paced environment. Recruiters need to move fast. So you get whizzed through the process compared to some other industries.
Nice. Exactly. Yeah. Interesting. So can you talk to me about what should do between now and their MBA if tech is their goal? So let's say they want to make one of these transitions we've talked about. They want to move into the tech industry. Maybe they've been admitted in round one and they have 6 months before the program starts. What can they do between getting their offer letter from Oxford or any other MBA program and starting the program if tech is their ultimate goal?
Networking is probably the number one thing. And I don't like the word networking because I know it puts a lot of people off. It certainly puts me off as an introvert even, but what I mean by networking is having meaningful conversations with people ultimately. So you've got to just get out there and talk to people who are in the tech sector.
How might they do that?
It's obvious, but LinkedIn, business schools have alumni, right? And this is the beauty of it. You can very easily find alumni who work in the tech sector. So a few simple searches on LinkedIn. So actually, it doesn't matter, I would say, who they are in terms of the role that they do, even what country they're based in. If they're working in the tech sector, they've got a relevant perspective for you. And the more perspective you get, the better. So build those insights. And by meaningful conversations, I mean, once you've got past the kind of, you've made a connection on LinkedIn. And by the way, all of this work should be underpinned, in my opinion, by the 2-Hour Job Search, which is a book and methodology by Steve Dalton. Obviously, he's been around for years and is well known on the circuit. So
can I just say, I went through the same process with Oxford Careers, and that was one of the recommendations they made, and that was super helpful for me in my job processes. But yeah, further down the line.
It's great to hear that, because it's one of the first things I say is, have you read the book? Because there's so much good work you can do following that methodology. So all of this is underpinned by that. If you're considering doing an MBA, buy the book, right? It's less than £10 on Amazon and other good bookstores. And it's not a heavy read either, right? I'm sure, I don't know if you remember, it's a couple of 100 pages. It's not heavy. So that should be one of the most important books you read before you do the MBA. And then once you've got that kind of methodology helping you reach out, connect with people by meaningful conversations, I mean, looking to actually just chat on a human to human level about what someone's doing. How did they get into it? How have they found it? What don't they like about the space as much as, please don't ask, can you get me a job further down the line, right? Of course, it's not about that. It's about building a relationship through finding things in common and looking to understand their experience and also giving back, right? Is there anything you can do to help them? It's got to be a two-way thing. So you'll build some great relationships, and then by the time you're on the MBA and you're hopefully keeping in touch with that person and updating them on your progress and finding out how they're doing, they become a crucial part of your journey further down the line when it comes to, okay, now I'm looking at jobs and I've found this job and this is all the work that I've done. Here's this job. What do you think? How do you think I can position myself well for it? And you've got this advocate who you've built a relationship with, who knows what good looks like. That's the golden ticket as far as I'm concerned, if there is such a thing, of having an advocate who is willing to help you position yourself well and potentially even help you get your CV in front of the right person. And that is just such a powerful thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of a continuation of the process that people go through when they're applying to MBA programs. So one thing I always do with clients when we're working towards an application for a certain school is go and have conversations with people who are in that school now or who have graduated from that school fairly recently, who can talk to that school's strengths and weaknesses and the same questions. What do you like about the program? What do you dislike about the program? And maybe if they get waitlisted, for example, that person might be able to send a letter of referral to the admissions officer. So it's a very clear parallel with the actual MBA admissions process, the job application process, just a few months further down the line. And as you say, a lot of the same advice and a lot of the same tips for applicants to follow. Really, really nice to see. So once people are then on an MBA, right? You've got your admit, you've done this sort of networking work, right? It's day one of the program. What should students do to make the most of A, the curriculum, but B, the careers center on an MBA so that they can get that target job afterwards?
So yeah, get and talk to your careers department day one. A lot of people will get the opportunity to talk to their career services department before they start in the kind of preceding months. I know that's something Oxford would do, and it's particularly useful for people to start kind of putting those questions out there of what do I need to do?
Particularly for shorter programs, 1-year programs.
Yeah, exactly. Time is so precious, right? You've got to be on it from day one. So any work you can do in advance is just going to help you so much further down the line. So hopefully you've already started to find out who the career coaches are, who you can talk to by the time you get to day one. And then typically when you're in day one, certainly the first couple of weeks, you're getting oriented with the program, right? You're getting a kind of set program typically of meeting different departments, understanding how everything works. So completely immerse yourself and engage in that fully, because again, especially in the shorter programs, it's a great opportunity to learn and to just get the lay of the land and understand some of the timelines so that you can then be smart with your time. And by the way, by the time you've read the 2-hour job search book, right, you're already in a really good place to kind of be managing that pipeline of planning by the time you start your MBA. And then, start those conversations with careers, because if you're going to a career coach and you're saying, right, I've read the book, this is my lamp list, I've got my priorities, I've been talking to these people, this is what I understand, you can sense check it with careers. And that would be like music to my ears as a career coach, that someone's clear about the work that they've done, they're clearly owning it themselves. They're not just kind of sitting down and saying, can I make this move? Or, can you tell me, is my CV good? Because there's so many dependencies as to what makes a CV look good, depends what for, and so on. So actually, but if you can show that you've done all of that work, you can have really super productive conversations with the careers department about the tangible next steps that you need to take on the path that you've identified. And then when it comes to curriculum, I mean, again, it's going to vary from school to school, but being clear about what's coming and when, and are there certain skills that you will need to have already by the time interview processes start for corporations, and if so, what can you do about that? So the clearer you are about the kind of some of the tangible skills that are going to help you in the process, then have those conversations as well.
You touched on SQL training, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it is, you only have to look at job descriptions for tech companies, right? There's a great website called otter.com, by the way, OTTA.com. It's mainly UK-based tech startup and scale-ups. It's a jobs board, but it's super clever. And you can refine by certain things that you're interested in, certain types of sector, certain types of role. Do they sponsor visas, salary range, etc.? So actually, that's a really good resource. And outside of that, I suppose you've just got you've got so many kind of things swirling around in your head. I think those first few months are going to be crucial for you to make sense of it and have a plan, because again, the career resources are there to help you be confident in your plan, and you can never have one plan and that's it for the next 6 months. You've got to keep sense checking it. The goalposts will move, I suppose, is the other thing to be open-minded about. You maybe have a set function or a set company that you're interested in, and those opportunities might not be there by the time it comes around to applying. So you've got to be resilient and open-minded enough that things will change and be out of your control, and you will get knocked back. What is your plan B? What are the inputs that you can make to drive a good output?
Make sure you've got enough irons in the fire.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, it's not about playing the field either, right? But it's having options, being adaptable, and being clear about the things that are in your control.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's super valuable advice, Tom. Thank you so much for going into this. If somebody wants to get hold of you, how can they do that?
Well, just on LinkedIn. So I'm there. You have to remember to search for my name with the correct spelling, because there are lots of Tom Lawrences out there, and mine is spelt slightly differently with 2 A's. And it just so happens there is a Tom Lawrence at Oxford who's a professor. Me and him used to get emails meant for each other. His name is Lawrence. Mine is Lawrence.
Perfect.
Obviously my picture is a fair representation of me, so you can find me.
We'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile as well in the comments.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Tom, absolutely brilliant. Really, really interesting. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and good luck with all your future endeavors.
Thanks, Sam, and to you too.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.